The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 37. The First Female Martyrs of the Muslims' Liberation Movement. While Dr. Ibtihal is struggling with her romantic emotions, a huge disaster has occurred among the employees of the Muslims' liberation movement that almost paralyzed the progress of the movement and put an end to it. The 2 Lebanese sisters had managed to hide their secret conversion from Islam to Christianity and the place of their work from their Muslim parents for quite a long time. No one among the Arab Muslim community in Toronto was able to recognize their voices whenever they broadcasted their weekly programs. Their conversion out of Islam and their work with the Muslims' liberation movement went concealed until one of the 2 sisters revealed this information to her Muslim boyfriend. Her intention was to win her Arab lover to her side. She wanted him to experience the joy of being set free from the prison of Islam. Moreover, she did not want to marry a boy who was still following those Islamic terrorist beliefs. But her Muslim lover became outraged and threatened to break their friendship and expose her abominable apostasy to other Muslims if she would not reconvert back to Islam and stop working for such an anti-Islamic movement. The Arab girl refused to yield to his threats and told him she was prepared to die for her noble cause. In an indescribable rage, the Muslim boyfriend told his Arab girlfriend that he was going to inform the entire Muslim community in Toronto and her Lebanese parents too. When the Muslim apostate girl discovered that she made a grievous mistake, she shared her serious problem with her Arab apostate sister. Her sister did not give her any wise advice, but told her to ignore her boyfriend's threats. Instead of sharing the problem with other members of the Muslims' liberation movement, the 2 Arab sisters decided to keep it to themselves. Shortly after those happenings, on a particular morning, the Sudanese apostate man forced the Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal out of her sleep. Kamal never came to Ibtihal's residence unless there is a serious problem. Whenever the 2 wanted to meet, they always met in some private place. Moreover, no one among the board of directors and other members of the working team knows the residence of the controversial Sudanese female author Dr. Ibtihal except Dr. Kamal. It was the wise advice of Kamal that Ibtihal should not reveal the address of her residence to any other member of the Muslims' liberation movement, no matter how she trusts him or her. On that morning, Dr. Kamal rushed to the apartment of the hiding Sudanese apostate woman with the local newspaper in his hands. When the Christian girl Dr. Ibtihal opened her door, she became shocked to see her Muslim apostate lover Dr. Kamal was trembling like a reed while holding the newspaper in front of him like a bomb that was going to explode at any moment. He could not be able to utter a word. He just walked inside the living room and gave the newspaper to the astonished Sudanese woman Dr. Ibtihal and asked her to read the breaking news. A Muslim immigrant father has killed his 2 Lebanese daughters because they left Islam and converted to Christianity and joined the Muslims' liberation movement. At once, Dr. Ibtihal dropped the newspaper from her hands and fell unconscious on the floor. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in the hospital. Dr. Kamal and 8 other members of the board of directors are surrounding her bed. In her private room in the hospital, Dr. Ibtihal conducted a quick emergency meeting with the directors of the Muslims' liberation movement. The emergency meeting made a collective decision that all the office apartments of the movement should close for an indefinite period. Furthermore, the Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal suggested that the controversial female author Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin, who is the female CEO of the Muslims' liberation movement, should leave the city of Toronto immediately and go to a far place somewhere in Western Canada and hides there until the dust settles. She shouldn't return until the media and the public digested the shocking news of the horrific homicide. Dr. Kamal promised to handle the media and convinced his female boss Dr. Ibtihal to leave to him the other affairs of the Muslims' liberation movement. Reluctantly, the brave Sudanese apostate woman accepted the decision of the board of directors and flew to the city of Montreal. Her apostate lover wants her to fly to Calgary or Vancouver in Western Canada, but she resolutely decided to remain in Eastern Canada. In the meantime, the cruel murder of the two apostatized Lebanese sisters by their own Muslim father has turned the city of Toronto upside down. The father killed his daughters in a cold-blooded fashion. He murdered them in a brutal way by burning them alive with fire. He bought a large quantity of gasoline and poured it on their beds while the two girls were sleeping at night in the same room. Then he set their clothes and bodies on fire and locked the door and windows of their room from without and waited with a big dagger in his right hand and a long stick in his left hand. He decided to stab to death any one of his daughters if she managed to escape from the fire. He was also determined to beat her up with his big rod, even if the flames were consuming her defiled body. Meanwhile, the gasoline cooked the flesh of the two female victims as if someone had cooked the meat of two young goats. When the police of Toronto came to arrest the murderous father, his son, who is the brother of the two victims, tried to prevent them and told them that his father did the right thing and should not be arrested. The brother was also arrested and charged with obstruction of justice. When the police interrogated the father, he said he killed his daughters because they apostatized from Islam and became abominable, filthy infidel Christian girls. He said it was the punishment that the Sharia prescribed to any apostate out of Islam. He further said that since Canada is a secular country and hence does not follow the Sharia of Allah and His Prophet, he felt it was his religious obligation as a Muslim father to apply the Islamic law on his two apostatized daughters. The Muslim community in Toronto did not condemn the murder of the two apostatized sisters, but condemned the way the Muslim father heartlessly killed his daughters. Some Muslim leaders in Canada argued that killing an apostate from Islam is an undeniable punishment based on authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, and hence no Muslim can dare to deny it unless he rejects the teachings of his infallible Prophet Muhammad. Those leaders used the following hadiths of their alleged prophet of God and a verse from the Holy Quran to support their words. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Whoever changes his religion, kill him." Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith number 3017. The Quran also supported the commandment of the Prophet Muhammad and prescribed capital punishment for heretics and apostates. But if they turn back, seize them and kill them wherever you find them. And do not take from them any ally and not any helper. Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse 89. There are many more authentic hadiths that prescribe capital punishment to Muslim apostates. The Prophet Muhammad said, if somebody, a Muslim, discards his religion, kill him. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 260, and he also said, the Muslim who confessed that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and that I am his apostle, his blood cannot be shed except in 3 cases. In cases for murder, a married person who commits illegal sexual intercourse, and the one who leaves Islam and the community of Muslims. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 9, Book 83, Hadith number 17. A man embraced Islam and then reverted back to Judaism. Muadh bin Jabal came and saw the man with Abu Musa. Muadh asked, what is wrong with this man? Abu Musa replied, he embraced Islam and then reverted back to Judaism. Muadh said, I will not sit down unless you kill him. As it is, the verdict of Allah and His Apostle. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 9, Book 89, Hadith number 27. According to those Muslim leaders, it never happened in the history of Islam that an apostate had been burned with fire. Therefore, the Muslim leaders likewise condemned the brutal way the Arab father of the 2 Lebanese sisters murdered his daughters, but indirectly supported the capital punishment of apostasy. Some of them said since Canada is not a Muslim country and the Sharia is not implemented in such a secular land, therefore, no Muslim is supposed to punish any apostate from Islam. Some non-Muslim writers showed 2 pieces of evidence from the examples of the 2 so-called rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq and Ali ibn Abi Talib, that apostates from Islam were killed and burned with fire. The first caliph, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, used to tell those whom he sent to fight the apostatized tribes, "First call them to forsake their apostasy and reconvert back Islam. If they refuse, do not leave any one of them. Burn them with fire, kill them with force, and take their women and children as booty." Al-Tabari, Part 2, pages number 258, 272. About the fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, narrated Ikrimah, "Some apostates were brought to Ali and he burnt them alive." Sahih al-Bukhari, Part 9, Hadith number 59. A Muslim man from the tribe of Bani al became a Christian. They brought him to the caliph. Ali chained hands and feet in irons. Ali talked to him for a long time. The man said to him, "I know that Jesus is the Son of God." Ali stood up and stepped on him. When the people saw that, they too stood up and stepped on him. Then Ali told them, "Kill him." They killed him. Then Ali ordered them to burn his corpse. Ibn Hazm, Part 2, page 190. Another Muslim apostatized and became a Christian. Ali ordered him to repent, but he refused. Ali killed him and did not deliver his corpse to his family. They offered him a lot of money to do so, but the Caliph Ali refused to give it and burned the corpse. Ibn Hazm, Part 2, page 190. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood and a leading scholar of the Sunni Muslims, who are 90% of Muslims of the world, said in an interview on Egypt TV, if they had gotten rid of the apostasy punishment, Islam wouldn't exist today. Opposing apostasy is what kept Islam to this day. He also said that apostasy, Muslims leaving Islam, is a grave danger to the Muslim community and that it is the duty of all Muslims is to combat apostasy in all its forms and wherefrom it comes, giving it no chance to pervade in Muslim world. Meanwhile, the media interviewed the second person in the Muslims' liberation movement regarding the tragic murder of the two ex-Muslim sisters. Dr. Kamal expressed his deep sorrow for the brutal way the two Lebanese sisters had been killed. He told the media that the two sisters are the first two female brave martyrs of a freedom movement that is going to liberate over 1.5 billion Muslim prisoners who are kept chained for over 1,400 years by the devilish teachings of the Quran and the evil hadiths of the so-called Prophet of God Muhammad. He further said that their blood was not wasted, but proved to the world that there is an urgent need for the world to wake up and confront the evils of Islam. Dr. Kamal concluded by saying, "The only solution available before the civilized world is to support and further the noble cause of the Muslims' liberation movement, which was initiated by the former Muslim girl Ibtihal, who likewise was condemned to be put to death for her apostasy. But she had been miraculously rescued by some people and smuggled her out of Sudan to Libya and then to Greece until God finally brought her as a resettled refugee in Canada, the land of freedom of faith." In the end, the highly educated Sudanese man referred to Article 18 of the Charter of Human Rights, which grants freedom of religious conversion to every citizen in the world. According to Article 18 of the Charter of Human Rights, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Chapter 38. Full report about the Mubarak Muslim family. One of the daily newspapers in Toronto City included a detailed report about the life of the Arab family of the two murdered sisters. The report traced the family to its origin in Lebanon. According to the report, the Muslim family was forced to flee Beirut during the 20 years of the civil war and took refuge in Amman. At that time, the family had only one son, Mr. Mubarak, and his wife Shyness and their little son Mohsen experienced an exceedingly difficult time in the capital city of Jordan. The Lebanese husband could not find any decent job to help him to take care of his young wife and a little son. At that time, his young Arab wife Shyness was 14 years old, and her Muslim husband was 38 years of age. Out of the fear of cheating on him or being sexually harassed and abused by her employer or one of her workplace male colleagues, as is a common practice in the Middle East, Mr. Mubarak did not allow his young and pretty wife to do any work. Even if he sends her to work as a maidservant in a rich Arab family house, he knew she would be raped by the husband of that family, or she would be sexually harassed by his grown-up sons. Therefore, the only available work for his teenage young wife was to be a domestic help in someone's residence. Every foreign female maidservant in the Middle East is considered to be a sex slave, or what the Quran called his right-hand possession Jariya, and as such he believes it is his God-given right to have sex with her without marriage and against her wish. Their fatwa was issued by prominent religious leaders in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries permitting male members of each family to have sex with their foreign maidservants because they are their right-hand possession. Many maidservants from Pakistan, India, Philippines, Indonesia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Iraq, Sudan, and Syria complained that they were raped by their male employers. But their complaints were rejected by the Sharia courts due to the lack of 4 male Muslim witnesses for proving adultery or rape. For proving adultery, Islam requires the confession of the adulterer and adulteress or pregnancy or 4 male witnesses. The girl who becomes pregnant through rape cannot prove it without 4 witnesses, and paternity DNA is not allowed in such a case. On the contrary, her pregnancy out of the marriage bond may be used as proof of adultery against her. If she is not married, she will get 100 lashes on her naked back and buttocks, and if she has another husband, she will be stoned to death. Mr. Mubarak didn't want to share his young wife's virtue with other lustful Arab men. Consequently, he struggled alone to take care of his family by doing some hard work. For 5 years, the Mubarak family struggled for survival in Amman. When the civil war in Lebanon became a perpetual struggle for political power and religious strife, the Mubarak family gave up hope of returning to their beautiful country Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Mubarak family's burden was tripled when Shyness delivered 2 twin girls. Mr. Mubarak could no longer afford to feed his big family. He was faced with 2 unavoidable choices, either to allow his wife Shyness to find work as a maidservant or else the family should find a way to emigrate to the West. Following the advice of some Lebanese friends, the Mubarak family became refugees in Jordan and joined the refugee camp in Amman City. In the camp, the family was provided with free meals and accommodation. In fact, the 5 members of the family were stuffed into a small tent. The majority of the refugees in that camp were Lebanese and Palestinians. The Mubarak family spent another 2 years in the refugee camp before their turn to get resettlement in Canada came. Canada is the promised land for refugees all over the world. When the family immigrated to Canada, the son Mohsen was 10 years old, and the twin daughters were only 3 years old. The family landed in Toronto City and made it their home. For 1 year, the Canadian government provided free accommodation and food for the Mubarak family. After a year, the family was shifted to the welfare system. The Mubarak son was enrolled in a school as soon as the family came to Toronto. As for Mubarak and his wife, they were enrolled in a special school for immigrants that taught English as a second language. For 3 years, Mubarak and Shaina continued in that ESL program. For some reason, Mubarak turned out to be an uneducable man, whereas Shyness mastered the English language and joined another school to get her upgrading to grade 12. Later, Shyness took a babysitting course and opened in her residence her own home daycare and began to make good money by babysitting many Arab children. Her husband Mubarak became jobless and depended on his hardworking wife, while their 3 children were going to their school. The Mubarak family's twin daughters, Rasha and Shaza, were 3 years and 4 months old when they were brought from Jordan to Canada. They did not have enough time to learn the Islamic cultural values of their parents while they were in the refugee camp in Jordan. Like other immigrant children, the parents tried for many years to instill in their daughters some values that seemed foreign to the country they were growing up in. For that reason, when the daughters joined the school and mixed with other Canadian kids, their Islamic values did not make any sense to them. As the years passed by, the 2 daughters found themselves being caught up between 2 contradictory cultures. At home, they were taught all the Islamic laws and the duties of the Muslim girls, whereas at the school they learned the entire Western values, which did not make a sharp distinction between males and females. The twin sisters found expression of themselves in the values they learned at school and from their Canadian friends. Therefore, what their parents tried to make out of them didn't hold good. Their Arab parents discovered too late that they made a big mistake by not sending their daughters to a private Muslim school where teaching and memorizing the Quran are imperative daily lessons. Instead, they sent them to a public Canadian school where no religion is allowed to be taught to the students. As a matter of fact, the Muslim parents chose the public school because it is free of charge and provides a free school bus for their daughters, while the private Muslim school charges annual fees and provided no transportation to its students. Nonetheless, the Mubarak family fully succeeded in turning their son into a typical Muslim boy. Mohsen assimilated all the Islamic teachings and values while he was growing up in the refugee camp in Jordan, which turned him into a despiser and hater of everything that pertained to Western values. He was always angry with his sisters. Many times, he applied force to correct the un-Islamic behaviors of his sisters. Very often, he supported his father when the latter beat his daughters. Even so, the two female twins continued to be rebellious to those rules that they found to be depriving them of their rights as human beings with equal rights to other non-Muslim kids. So, in a home full of strife between halal and haram, or right and wrong, Rasha and Shaza grew up into beautiful girls. Behind their beautiful and young faces, there was a volcano waiting for a small crack to erupt into revolt against those misogynistic values. They always hated the Islamic hijabs and abayas that their father, mother, and big brother were forcing them to put on. Their moral characters were torn between those two opposing cultures. They did not find real expression of themselves until they secretly converted to Christianity and joined the working team of the Muslims' liberation movement. For a few months, the two young souls soared into a haven of bliss. They loved the movement and served it sincerely. Their musical and charming feminine sweet voices captivated the heart of everyone who heard their one-hour weekly program. The female founder of the movement, Ibtihal, and the Sudanese apostate man Kamal used sophisticated equipment to alter the voices of the Lebanese twin sisters so no one could recognize them when they spoke in Arabic or English. The twin sisters always hoped and prayed that one day their parents and brother would discover the beauty and the joy of being free from those inhumane and terrorizing teachings of the Quran and the misogynistic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. Unfortunately, things did not work the way they hoped. Before they could enjoy their youth and fulfill their duties as female pioneers of the Muslims' liberation movement, their lovely voices were silenced forever. Never would the twin sisters ever have anticipated that their own father would pour gasoline on their beds and burn them alive to fulfill the will of Allah. Chapter 39. Blessing in Disguise. The brutal murder of the Lebanese twin apostatized sisters turned the table against the Muslims in Western countries and hence proved to be a blessing in disguise for the Muslims' liberation movement. It exposed the deception that Muslims and their religious leaders and imams of the mosques in the West are trying to hide by showing that Islam is the religion of peace and tolerance. It also exposed the false claim that Islam honors the woman and put her in the best social status in the world. It highlighted the goals of the Muslims' liberation movement where the two victims used to work and gave great credibility to Dr. Ibtihal and the work that she began as an apostatized Sudanese Muslim woman. Every major newspaper in Canada and the USA wrote in detail about the objectives and the work of the Muslims' liberation movement. The media also wrote about the evil of capital punishment for apostasy in Islam. They showed that Islam is a religion that lacks freedom of faith. According to the Prophet Muhammad, no one can leave Islam and is supposed to survive. The female founder of the liberation movement, the apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal, was invited by CNN to come for a one-hour interview with Larry King. Also, Dr. Kamal appeared on many TV channels in Canada and is interviewed by many other media people. The martyrdom of the two sisters also increased the number of followers and supporters of the Muslims' liberation movement. For the first time, the liberation movement received $1 million check from one single donor. The donor of such a huge amount requested the movement not to reveal his identity for safety measures. He mentioned in his brief letter that he is a Jew and full-heartedly supports the noble goals of the movement. He said he doesn't hate Muslims, but he wishes they can be liberated from their anti-Semitic religion and their prophet who promised his followers the destruction of all Jews of the world. The martyrdom of the twin sisters has rid the Sudanese apostate pretty woman Dr. Ibtihal of her hidden secret, removed the fear from her heart, and restored her courage. Shortly after her return from Montreal, she summoned her board of directors and approved the 2 rejected proposals of Dr. Kamal. Instead of only Canada, she suggested that the Muslims' liberation movement should also have branches across the Atlantic Ocean in Europe, Africa, and Asia. However, the highly educated man Dr. Kamal suggested that the movement should exercise due caution in planting new branches in European countries. According to him, Europe is so infected by Islamic ideas that Muslims controlled almost the entire continent. For that reason, Dr. Kamal proposed that the Muslims' liberation movement should first begin by branching out in Canada and then gradually move to the United States of America. The board of directors approved Dr. Kamal's wise advice. The second man in the movement wanted to launch the first branch of the movement in the second largest city in Canada, Vancouver. Howbeit, for some hidden reasons, the female CEO of the movement refused the proposal, and instead, she suggested that the second person in the movement, Dr. Kamal, should begin in Montreal. The reason she gave as an excuse to hide her hidden emotional motives did not convince anyone, but instead exposed her deep love for Dr. Kamal. She told the board of directors that Montreal is close to Toronto, and in case there is a problem, the Muslims' liberation movement base could send someone quickly to help Kamal. Following her advice, her handsome Muslim apostate lover Kamal started the first branch of the Muslims' liberation movement in the city of Montreal. In the meantime, the pretty apostate girl Ibtihal always finds an excuse to visit the new branch and meets her handsome man. The new branch followed the same method that the center followed when it initiated the first program in Toronto. The manager of the movement rented an apartment and converted it into an office. The branch started with a daily 1-hour radio program. Dr. Kamal was able to recruit new employees in a few months. The new employees are 2 Sudanese Christian girls, an ex-Muslim Iraqi man who apostatized, and 1 Palestinian Christian girl. The Palestinian girl became a shining star in a few months. Her program inspired many Muslims to forsake their faith and join the liberation movement. The Palestinian Christian girl is called Warda, which means rose. As her name, her sweet voice, like the fragrance after the rain, inspired many people to love her and follow her wise advice. Therefore, due to her great contribution, she is promoted to the rank of a big female manager under the recommendation of Dr. Kamal. Warda visited the base of the movement in Toronto and recorded some of her programs. Dr. Ibtihal liked Warda and congratulated her for the good work she is doing in Montreal. The commanding personality of Warda and her outstanding achievement in Montreal has soon placed her in the 3rd position in the Muslims' liberation movement, after Ibtihal and Kamal. When Dr. Kamal realized that Warda could lead the team in Montreal, he suggested he should go to Western Canada and launch a 3rd branch for the Muslims' liberation movement. In fact, many followers criticized the Muslims' liberation movement for focusing its efforts only on Eastern Canada. When the directors of the liberation movement realized that there's a pressing demand for new branches in Vancouver and Calgary, it decided to send some of its directors to start branches in those Western Canadian cities. Dr. Ibtihal called for a board of directors meeting to decide whom to send to Western Canada. By this time, the Muslims' liberation movement has 20 managers. The directors insisted that the female CEO Dr. Ibtihal should remain the female chief of directors of the Muslims' liberation movement. Instead of Dr. Kamal, the board of directors under the influence of Ibtihal voted in favor of sending the Palestinian girl Warda to Vancouver to launch a new branch. The directors also voted in favor of a Sudanese manager and decided to send him to the Alberta province to launch a new branch in Calgary City. In a few months, those 2 new branches flourished and achieved huge success by gaining large numbers of followers and supporters and Muslim converts to Christianity in Western Canada. Chapter 40. The Complaint of Muslims to the United Nations. The huge success that the Muslims' liberation movement achieved after a few months following the martyrdom of the Toronto 2 Lebanese sisters caused wild protests in the Muslim world. Such protests led some countries to threaten to cut their political and economic relations with Canada. Those countries demanded that Canada should close all the secret offices of the Muslims' liberation movement and kick its leaders out of the country. Besides that, some Islamic groups in Canada submitted a joint complaint to the United Nations organization against the Muslims' liberation movement. They accused it of being an anti-Islamic movement. Further than that, the complaint stated that the Muslims' liberation movement violated the second article of the Charter of Human Rights, which treated all religions equally. Therefore, in their complaint, the religious groups quoted Article 2 of the Declaration of Human Rights. According to them, the Muslims' liberation movement is making a religious distinction and treating Muslims as a satanic race or Antichrist followers. Article 2 states that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or another opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or another status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made based on the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. When the Muslims' liberation movement heard about the complaint, it responded by submitting a counter-complaint to the United Nations that demanded the Islamic religious groups in Canada erase those verses of the Quran, which teach violence and make a distinction between Muslims and followers of other religions. Non-Muslims are called in the Quran the unclean infidels, Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 28. The complaint stated that some verses of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad called Christians and Jews the descendants of monkeys and pigs. Moreover, the Quran condemned Christians as unbelievers because they worshipped Jesus as God. The complaint stated that those judgmental verses should be erased from the Quran. If the Islamic groups in Canada would comply with those conditions, the Muslims' liberation movement promised to shut all its offices and move out of Canada and go to another country. To support the complaint with tangible evidence, the movement quoted the following verses of the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah 5, verse 17, "Verily they are infidels those who say, the Messiah, son of Mary, is God." Surah Al-Ma'idah 5, verse 51, "Muslim believers, take not Jews and Christians for your friends. They are but friends and protectors to each other." Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 29, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah or the last day, who do not forbid that which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, or acknowledge the religion of truth, Islam, even if they are people of the book, Christians and Jews, until they pay the jizya in submission, feel subdued, and inferiors." Another English translation says, "They should pay the jizya in acknowledgement of our superiority over them and their state of subjection and humiliation." Abu Huraira reported Allah's Messenger as saying, "Do not greet the Jews and the Christians before they greet you, and when you meet any one of them on the roads, force him to go to the narrowest part of it." Sahih Muslim, Book 26, Hadith number 5389. In Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 5, Hadith number 727. When Allah's apostle became seriously sick, he started covering his face with a woolen sheet. When he felt short of breath, he removed it and said, "That is so. Allah's curse be on the Jews and Christians." The principal of an Islamic school has admitted that it uses textbooks which describe Jews as apes and Christians as pigs, and has refused to withdraw them. Dr. Sumaya Al-Yusuf confirmed that the offending books exist after former teacher Colin Cook alleged that children as young as 5 are taught from racist materials at the King Fahd Academy in Acton, in the UK. In his employment tribunal claim, Mr. Cook, who taught English at the school for 19 years, accused it of poisoning pupils' minds with a curriculum of hate. Arabic translators have found that books also describe Jews as repugnant. According to the female British historian Battier, Islam looks at a non-Muslim country, such as Canada, and its inhabitants as the land of the non-believers, called the lands of war or Dar al-Harb, where infidels to be fought because they oppose the establishment of Islamic law in their lands. As enemies of Allah, they are accorded no rights. They, themselves, and their property become permissible, or mubah, for all Muslims to do to them whatever they like, such as killing the infidel men, raping their women, possessing their homes and properties, and enslaving their women and children and selling them as slaves. Accordingly, they can be taken as slaves, kidnapped for ransom, robbed, raped, maimed, or killed with impunity. War is to be waged against them in order to Islamize their territory, which, according to the beliefs of Islam, must be conquered for Allah. If they resist, Islamic law provides for the deportation or massacre of the men and the enslavement of women and children. From the same female author, we find that Christians and Jews living in a Muslim country were subjected to some discriminative rules that were meant to dehumanize them. Rules of the dhimmi, Christian, and Jew. Rules would be formulated to deny the Christians and Jews due process of the Sharia law. Discriminatory and restrictive dress and behavior codes would be enacted and severely enforced to reduce the dhimmi into a state of despair and poverty. Dehumanizing the dhimmi is common and generally the rule. Various forms of physical abuse were common. Many times, the distinctive dress was specified to identify a dhimmi that he would be unable to either mix with a Muslim or even walk in a Muslim area of a city. Other rules specified such demeaning dress codes as not wearing shoes or sandals, not using certain colors, and wearing stars on their clothing. Those stars are like the badges of shame that the Jews were forced in some European countries to put on when they were living in Europe. A badge of shame, also a symbol of shame, a mark of shame, or a stigma, is typically a distinctive symbol required to be worn by a specific group or an individual for the purpose of public humiliation, ostracism, or persecution. Moreover, Jewish women were forced by Muslims not to put on shoes, or sometimes only one shoe was allowed. In addition, each Jewish woman must tie a small bell in her clothes so that when she walks on the road, the tinkling of the bell would alert Muslim men that an infidel woman is coming so that they wouldn't look at her and get tempted by her improper dress and exposed face, legs, and hands. Dhimmis were often prohibited from working in many occupations. Even rules were made as to how a dhimmi could ride a mule to distinguish him from a Muslim. For instance, the dhimmi wasn't allowed to use a saddle on his donkey or ride on a horse or camel, the two noble animals. Penalties for breaking the rules. The non-observance of these rules would entail a severe beating. Often passing a Muslim on the wrong side would begin a beating that could leave a dhimmi mortally wounded. Since the dhimmis were denied the ability to testify against a Muslim, there was absolutely no justice served. If the local Muslim population became intolerant or jealous of the successes of the dhimmis, Jews, and Christians, then a pogrom would ensue. The dhimmi communities could find themselves evicted, women raped, exorbitant ransoms placed on them, children abducted and forced to convert to Islam, and in other cases, mass murders of the dhimmi population were condoned. Despite the strong supporting pieces of evidence, at the end of the day, the United Nations Organization headquarters in Geneva dismissed the two complaints and requested the two disputing parties to refer their complaints to a court of law in Canada.